Welcome to E-Commerce Deep Dive, the show where we explore e-commerce business strategy and the future of shopping online. Your host is John Giorso, founder and CEO of Orca Pacific, a full-service agency dedicated to growing brands on Amazon. Every week, John talks shop with the biggest players in retail and e-commerce. Today's episode is a previously recorded session from our E-Commerce Deep Dive Live series, Leveraging Opportunities Beyond the World of Amazon. In this episode, Rick Watson, Ross Coley, and Dan Stack talk through opportunities that exist beyond the Amazon platform. We hope you enjoy.
My name is Ross Coley. I'm a founder and CEO of the Harvest Group, and we're an omni-channel agency that helps consumer packaged goods brands grow their business at key retailers like Walmart, Sam's Club, and Kroger. And excited to talk about Q4 and beyond with this group today.
Awesome. Hi guys, my name is Rick Watson. I'm CEO of RMW Commerce Consulting, and the problem I solve is a lot of management teams and investors are over-indexed in retail and under-indexed in e-com, either B2B or direct-to-consumer. And so I help formulate a plan for them and guide them through the execution for how to make that happen and to get their business growing.
Awesome, thanks. So excited to be here. My name's Dan Stack. I'm the VP of National Accounts for Ashley Furniture. And so most folks are probably super familiar with our direct-to-consumer brand, Ashley Home Store, North America's largest retailer, close to 1,000 stores worldwide. But what a lot of folks don't know is we're actually the world's largest manufacturer, and I represent two divisions there. So I work with all of our e-commerce partners on a B2B relationship, and then also with all of our mass merchants partners. So, yep, that's me.
Awesome. Thanks for the intros, guys. Wanted to let everyone know this is, we've slated an hour for this discussion. That said, if we go through all the topics we wanted to talk about and we don't reach the hour, we'll give you that time back, but we do have it slated for an hour. We will be reaching out with a recording of this webinar to all the attendees, so definitely happy to provide that to you and your teams. I'm now going to drop this screen share away. That way you can see our lovely hosts, and then I'm just going to hand it right over to you, Rick. Go ahead.
Awesome. Appreciate being on the call. So really, the webinar is about leveraging opportunities beyond the world of Amazon, but we'll also dive into, I think, a number of direct-to-consumer topics today, because everyone, we have Q4 coming up before you know it. And so I think a lot of these things are interesting. I was pulling some stats from eMarketer that came out at the end of July, and they didn't do a year-over-year comparison. So I did some Googling and found their stats from last year across the same categories. And I thought it'd be interesting to start with a preview of sort of where have we come in the last year? And this is a retail e-commerce sales share by category, basically online versus offline. And this is just where we're coming a year, which the stats are amazing. You've seen Toby Lutka from Shopify said we've come 10 years and 10 weeks. And this is really illustrating this from a numbers point of view. So just to give you some example, books, movies, and video last year to this year, 50% penetration to 62.5% penetration. Consumers in computer and consumer electronics from 39% to 49% penetration online to offline. Toys and hobby from 30% to 47.8%. That's a massive change in 1 year. Apparel and accessories up from 26% penetration in the category to 36% penetration in the category over Q2. Office equipment from 32 to 39%. And the interesting thing I see, if you look at something like food and beverage, which includes grocery, which is a massive under-penetrated category, last year 2%, this year 3.7%, and just think about this, the huge numbers behind that and how much we have to go in e-com. And so there's, kind of going back to Amazon, that's always day one. We're still in day one in e-commerce in a lot of these categories. And I think those stats kind of really drive that home. Kind of on top of that, we have a number of big trends coming into Q4 that we haven't seen to this scale before. We've had depressed, retailers that have shut doors. We've had continued bankruptcies. That has continued to push more share online. We have consumers shopping online for the first time. So we have new consumers. We have new retailers that weren't online last year that are online this year for the first time. We have consumers that are cooped up at home. We have Prime Day, which has moved into Q4 this year for the US. They've already said that. So that's going to come into October. And so all of those things together, I think we're going to see one of the biggest Q4s in recent memory without too much trouble. I don't know what the number is going to end up being. Wayfair reported earnings this morning just for Q2. They're 90% year over year. I think you could see for Q4 numbers north of that, like maybe 1.5 times, like, or twice as big as last year, if all these numbers hold up. So I think that's super interesting from a trend perspective. So that's sort of like the macro trends, what's actually happening in the world right now. In terms of the retail landscape, if you're a traditional brand that's selling through bricks and mortar, you have your own stores, you're selling through retailers, direct channels. And how Ashley and Dan is obviously quite familiar with this. And for Ross on the advisory side, doing the same thing. So from there, you have the online retailers that you could be pushing to, like Wayfair and others. You have marketplaces that you could be pushing to, Amazon, Walmart, House, Pinterest, whoever else is out there that fits you. There's Amazon, which is, you kind of have to put in their own category because they're capturing over 50% of all e-com growth, at least before this last quarter. I haven't seen that number for Q2, which is, I think, going to be super interesting. And then finally, you have all these channels, and as a brand, you're expanding into them, particularly ones that you haven't been before. So you have some of these channels that are underpenetrating that are now taking share. So that's a little bit of the landscape and where we're starting from. Of course, you have all the advertising players, on top of this with Google and Facebook, et cetera. So kind of to kick things off, I thought this would be a good question for both of you guys. Are there things that you are doing differently, either from your clients, from Ross's point of view, or you, Dan, from your company's point of view, that are different this Q4 than last Q4?
Yeah, I can kind of kick it off if you want. For us, and we touched on this a little bit kind of in the pre-meets and talking before we kicked it off. I mean, the trickiest part is really the supply chain at this point, right? So a great example is Wayfair came out with 90% growth, which is almost 3x their last quarter's growth rate before that. That material is like, those products don't come out of anywhere, and it's really difficult with furniture when it's quite large. So we're in a point right now where we're really reevaluating and getting granular in our supply chain and just kind of being dedicated to being in great stock position for it. Obviously with that is stock's a priority, just to kind of satisfy like the baseline needs. Like some of the other stuff that's a normal consideration, like promotional activity, as it relates to like cost concessions or even like marketing dollars overall, like those are going to go to the side, right? Because the first thing right now is like, you just want to have the product in stock. So it's kind of like getting back to basics, like e-com 101, like don't worry about too much stuff outside the box. Just kind of have your product there and be able to sell it, just based on how high demand's been over the last couple months. Ross, what are your thoughts on that? I know you have a diverse set of clients.
Yeah, no, I thought Rick did a great job kind of overviewing the game board. And I play a game with my kids called Labyrinth. And in great summary, you're trying to move your game piece from one place to the other, but the game board moves on every turn. And it kind of feels like that's the landscape that we're in. And so we do work with over 70 companies, from billion-dollar companies to Shark Tank entrepreneurs. Some of them have tailwinds, some of them have headwinds. So it's certainly not a one-size-fit-all answer. But I love your answer, Dan, in terms of back to basics. For almost everybody, they have to think from a supply chain perspective. Where am I at? How am I planning inventory? If I've got headwinds, I need to make sure I'm controlling costs. If I've got tailwinds, then I got to figure out how to get inventory into the system. I think the number one thing that we're focused on at the retailers that we work with, which is Walmart, Sam's Club, and Kroger, which are omni-channel retailers that largely, Rick, as you went through those penetration numbers, a lot of their volume falls into the under-penetrated categories. That penetration number has doubled during COVID. And I agree with your bullishness on the rest of the year that it's going to continue to go up in my estimation. And so those retailers have gone through massive reorgs as early as this week in Bentonville, Arkansas, where they're completely reorging to bring these organizations together where decisions will be made by one person for both online and in store. And so we're making sure that our clients have those basics covered in terms of content, PDP pages, inventory, reviews. And then once that one-on-one stuff's done, now we have marketing, the field of play of marketing, which for those that have been experienced in Amazon are like, duh, like that's kind of, we've been there, done that 5-10 years ago, but that's unfolding at our retailers where now I can spend money to drive volume if that makes sense in my category. So those are some of the things that we're focused on. That you've got brands that at these retailers or maybe in their business overall, they're catching up to what they need to be doing at e-commerce. And when you have a retailer like Walmart that represents their brick and mortar business is meaningful, and maybe your e-commerce business isn't, when you have a buyer saying, unless you do this, this, and this from an e-commerce perspective, you're not going to be in my stores, that starts to prick some ears up. And so we're focused on helping position people for that. Last thing I would say is Amazon's Prime Day is not just for Amazon. Walmart saw a 100% increase during Prime Day last year. And so I imagine some of those Q4 triggers like that will be big across the e-commerce ecosystem.
Hey everyone, John Giorso here. I hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. I wanted to let you know that this episode has been brought to you by Orca Pacific, the agency I founded to help brands succeed on the Amazon platform. If you need any services that relate to success on the platform, whether it be content, advertising, SEO, help on the back end when it comes to operational support, etc., feel free to reach out to our team. The best way to get in touch with us is on LinkedIn. And with that, we'll get back to the show.
If this is someone's first Q4 ever, what advice would you give them? And I'm going to give my own pre-answer, and I think it's a little bit of an amalgamation of your last two answers, which is availability is marketing right now. Most people are cutting marketing spend to deal with demand because their supply chain and operations are stressed. Right. If you're doing it for the first time, the bottom line is you don't know what you don't know. This is not a normal time. Everyone knows that, but everyone, if you haven't been through a Q4 before and peak days and understand load, and if you're not, if you're on a non-cloud e-commerce platform, you need to do your own capacity planning. Is something you've probably never done before. In the highest Q4 in recent memory, I would say two things: availability, and second is just through to fulfillment. Just making sure you've nailed that, because otherwise you're going to get crushed. Not only on the customer service side, you're not going to be able to handle that volume because your root cause problem is availability or fulfillment. Or, this is like 2/3 of your questions in any standard e-commerce company. Or you're going to get a whole bunch of returns because people aren't getting what what you promised them, which is the other side of it. So you're going to get crushed a month or two later on all the returns. So would love you guys, like maybe we can go in the opposite order now, like Ross, if you had one thing to tell people that are navigating their first Q4, what would you say?
Yeah, I would probably reframe the question a little bit, Rick, to say, I think it's everybody's first Q4 2020 of this type. So I think the advice I would add, I agree with what you said, is challenge all of your assumptions. So you mentioned you got new retailers, you got channels closing, opening. And so we're having brands reconsider their channel strategy, where they sell. They're seeing some retailers go bankrupt, some shut down that are predominantly brick and mortar, and are reassessing just key parts of their strategic plan that were assumed before. And so I'd re-challenge all those assumptions and as that game board shifts, just make sure that you're agile enough to make changes.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice, Ross. I mean, guys, for me, I look at it kind of like a short-term versus long-term objectives, and you've got to be very candid and concise on how you're going to develop your strategy with Q4, right? So the short-term deal for me, I'd tell someone, whether they're established retailer or e-tailer or omni-channel presence, is, you just have to have operational excellence, and you have to astonish the customer with like your fulfillment speed and efficiency, so everything should be ironed out. Yeah. So like, that's your short-term thing, is like, you just want people to have just an absolute great experience with your product when it comes to fulfillment speed. I think the long-term objective, and how I always look at it, whether it's Prime Day, Way Day, any special event, whether it's tentpole or non-traditional, and specifically Cyber 5 and Q4 as a whole, is like, how do you utilize those promotional events for sustained velocity, right? So how do you have that spike, whether you're giving a cost concession, you're going to really target all the traffic that's coming through the sites, and how you're going to kind of cast that out over Q1, right?
Yeah. So that's an interesting point. Obviously, the LTV of those customers you're acquiring, you get somebody on your site, maybe they sign up for your mailing list. How do you activate them after this event? I think most people are used to seeing blips and then fall off. Like, how would you advise someone who's never seen this, and like, how do I hold on to these customers?
Well, it depends. It's all about, I guess, where the locus of control is, right? Sorry, I have blocked. I'm like you. I keep blocking absolutely everything, and I have like calls coming through an iPad right now. Like, dude, seriously, enough. And it's okay. So, going back, you got to figure out where your locus of control is, kind of, and like what part of the ecosystem you really control. So, if you're on a third-party site, whether you're 1P or 3P, B2B versus B2C, operational efficiency is where you're going to create that LTV. Maybe not with that specific customer, but long-term, as you climb up the algorithms on the specific platform that you're selling on. Short-term in a B2C environment where you control everything,
when do you remarket to that person? Like,
depends on the life cycle, I think, of your customer, right? So home's unique, specifically in furnishings. Like, the average purchase for large items is like, for living room, for example, is like once every 7 years. But I'm sure like Ross and you guys have some clients where maybe they're in consumables or skincare or something like that, and it's like every 21 days. So I think it depends. It's like, what do you want those touch points to be? Frequency right now in marketing, it seems like overkill is like easily achieved, and people keep doubling down. Like, a great example would be like for me would be someone in wearables, right? So like shoes, like, why would I get an email from a shoe manufacturer like once a day? Like, I'm going to buy a pair of loafers like once every couple of years potentially, or once a year. So it's like, you've just got to back it into what your marketing strategy is and what frequency accommodates, I would say, an adequate response versus, overdoing it.
Got it. Yeah, Ross.
Yeah, the part of the retail ecosystem we deal with is much more consumable, so that repeat is more. And so I would say the retailers we're working with are really trying to transition those purchase decisions into more like subscriptions. And so some of them are literal subscriptions.
So interesting.
When we think about the grocery trip and, in an old school way, writing down the grocery list, what am I out, of, as my wife reminds me when we get out of something, write it down, or, put it on the list. As those repeat purchases move online, the list is created for us. And so this share shift of getting new consumers during COVID has the potential to be more like an annuity for brands. And so the meaningfulness of capturing them now could pay dividends for LTV for a long time.
Ross, I think that's a great way to position it as an annuity. I mean, that is right on the nail head kind of deal.
Yeah. What do you think most people don't realize about traditional D2C marketing versus having a subscription part of your revenue stream, Ross?
I guess in some senses it's cheaper. I don't have to, the acquisition costs are not as high potentially. And so, if I'm buying a razor or I'm buying pancake mix or a hair care product on any of those retailer websites, Target, Kroger, Walmart, that brain doesn't have to activate to get that on my list. It's on there. And it's just really convenient to add to cart. It's just that simple. Now, more dynamic database companies like Kroger, you actually have the ability to conquest and target people that are buying your competitors' products and segment it to that level. And so you're not completely insulated. And there's still some strategy and fun games to play in those ecosystems. But if I got to go out in the wild, wild west and get those clicks and get those conversions versus they're coming back to that list every week, every month, it could be cheaper over time.
Got it. No, that makes a lot of sense. Let's move on to Walmart. Spend some time there. Obviously, they've gone through some changes. They're continuing to go through some changes. I think everyone has their watch set to when Mark Lurie is going to move on, like when that day is. It's like most of his major lieutenants have moved on at this point from the original Jet days, and they've done some restructuring. I think he's probably just on as an advisor at this point. Most of the initiatives that he brought to the company have been either shut down or removed, unfortunately, including all the acquisitions, including like Hey Needle, Bonobos, and all these brands. Like at this point, if you can't pick like Amazon's greatest nemesis to beat Amazon, like what more can Walmart do to try and gain ground on Amazon?
Well, I think if you study Amazon, as Walmart has always been very good at doing, is studying their competitors. You can see some of the plays that they are running and that they're going to run. And so they need to grow their selection. And so, the move to Shopify and Fulfilled by Walmart to drive that through a marketplace. They grew e-commerce sales over 70% last quarter, and the marketplace outstripped that growth. It was the faster growing piece. So they're going to do that. Obviously, locking folks into the ecosystem with Walmart Plus, mimicking Prime is another key initiative. They've always been savvy about how they manage their margin mix with private label. So you've seen how Amazon's used e-commerce data to do that. I think you'll see them do that over time. So right now, I think they're focused on operational excellence. As Dan said, a huge amount of volume shifted online for them, and they were moving in that direction, but there were definitely some hiccups and delays in terms of how that went. Super interested to see their earnings call in a couple weeks to see what that growth is, and then as you alluded to, Rick, what was their meaningful market share gain versus Amazon will be fascinating. I'd say the biggest part of that Venn diagram that's less of an overlap right now between the two retailers is grocery. And so that's the main advantage that I would say Walmart has from a category standpoint. And then infrastructure. They've got 4,000 stores that are essentially fulfillment centers to manage returns and deliver that same-day delivery experience for the products that are in their store.
Do you think that Target is doing better things with their store infrastructure than Walmart at this stage?
I think they're running the same plays or similar plays. So pick up at store is the main thrust there. So I think their Venn diagram overlap in terms of category strength is more on top of Amazon from a general merchandise standpoint. Obviously, grocery and food being less of an emphasis there. So again, it's in some areas of the country you have to pick Costco, Sam's Club, BJ's. Others, there's one. They have a geographic focus. As retail moves more online and those lines are not as clearly drawn, how many shopping memberships will we all pay for? Will be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah. And that might be a good question for Dan. Like, let's go back to the shopping program. And if you go to a normal retailer, let's say you go walk into a Kroger or a Harris Teeter or a Target, it's free to sign up for their loyalty program, and so then they have your data forever, right? So they know everything about you as a shopper perspective. Whereas the online programs have been subscription based to lock you in for shipping and other things. Like, which is Walmart Plus going to be more like? Is it just going to be something that everyone is going to have and going to go back to, or is it going to be an either or with Prime?
I mean, if you look at either the barrier to entry for these programs, they're still loss leaders, right? And so it's still like a sexy way to kind of get you into their CRM process and then have attachment and buy-in. I think like the money thing for either of the organization is moot in nature, right? So whether it's your Prime membership or it's going to be, what do they make, $99 per membership, whatever it is now, or the $15, whatever they're going to charge for Walmart Plus. I think that's more instrumental just for buy-in overall versus like actual like P&L accountability for them, because it's nebulous when you look at the amount of capital they're going to raise on it versus what it's actually going to cost,
Right. Yeah, then definitely. And do you feel like Walmart's going to go in the Amazon direction of like video and all these other services, or are they going to stick pretty close to their core?
They're a great grocery store, and that's what most of their merchants will tell you, is like, we're a grocery store that sells other stuff, right?
Right.
Target's made that transition too, although they're a different type of merchandiser with more, I would say, vertical integration through the rest of their store, probably than Walmart has. But I don't know, man. Do you think, Ross, do you think they're going to put studios in Bentonville and start pumping out like major flicks like Amazon does now? Or
Yeah, no, I think, they actually been there, done that through an acquisition
Was it like
while
Voodoo or
back.
something? Was it?
What's that?
Wasn't there a company, Voodoo, that they partnered with or acquired? Yeah.
So, I feel like that space has gotten crowded. At the same time, you look at Disney's announcement this week. Would they sign up 50 million subscribers on top of
with one of the most coveted catalogs in all of the entertainment?
Fair enough.
The Sam Bolton story, you can only play it so many times. I don't know,
Yeah. One of the things that Walmart's always been done well in entertainment is leverage the volume that they run through their stores with those studios. So I don't know for sure. It feels like a crowded space to me. I think they've focused on their strengths with the Walmart Plus in terms of gas station, pharmacy, grocery, same-day delivery within 2 hours. That's pretty compelling. It'll be a while, I think, before Amazon can match that. I think that's the more meaningful.
Do you think on the gas side, do you think that is going to cut into BJ's or any of the other folks, or do you think people already have gas through Sam's Club, or is that really an attractor?
It's really hard to answer pinpoint questions like that with Walmart, because 90% of us live within 10 miles of a Walmart. So like everybody shops typically at Walmart at some point or another. So I think there will be market share pull from a lot of channels as retail consolidates. But to my point, I think Amazon, Netflix, Disney, there's plenty of other strong players that have gone after the streaming service game.
Right. No, that's interesting. I think we all saw in the last couple of months, Walmart add an integration to Shopify. And I think it's an interesting play, I think, for both sides, but more so for Walmart, who I think needs it more. They need more selection, to your point earlier in the call. And I've published about this a few times, and I'm really of two minds about this. Like, number one, like Walmart needs it more than Shopify. Shopify is in the power position here, not Walmart, which is an amazing fact, given that Walmart is, the number one largest retailer in the world. And Shopify, no one thought a thing about Shopify 3 years ago. They thought, 5 years ago that this was a toy Ruby on Rails website, and now it's an e-commerce powerhouse, which is it's still a phenomenal story. Having kind of been through the multi-channel software space, the history of marketplaces building their own integration software is not great. eBay has tried to build their own seller tools in the past. Amazon has built their own seller tools in the past. They've all been really pretty terrible. And this is why there are companies out, plenty of companies in the multi-channel integration space, including one that I started my career with, Channel Advisor. But there's so many in the space, and even eBay tried to knock out Channel Advisor back in like 2003 by hiring Accenture to connect retailers to eBay. It failed in a year. Right. I went to the Shopify App Store and went to the Walmart plugin and it was like 0.8 star reviews. You know, is this going to have an impact on them, or is it just more hype, or is it just something that they needed to do, but it's not going to be as big as people thought it was going to be?
I mean, there's definitely like great opportunity with it, but the strength of like the Shopify platform, when you look at like the diversity they have on their platform, Walmart as a whole has already, is going to be like more of the small merchants, right? So it's like, how many large enterprise level operations, first of all, are using Shopify, and if they are they going to have a direct relationship through Shopify on there? You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. On the other hand, like there's a ton of people on their platform. It's a great platform. Being able to be syndicated on that channel is effortlessly, is without a doubt an attraction. Could bring a large swath of probably more, hopefully like a regionalized assortment strategy for them where it kind of develops itself. But I don't know, man. It's Walmart's biggest need, I think, right now, merchandising strategy wise, is just terminal uniqueness. And that's where Wayfair is honestly smoking a lot of the competitive landscape. Same with Amazon and what they're doing with their own private label brands, is having something unique that does not index across the entire swath of the internet. You know,
that's a fascinating topic. I'd love for you to dive into that a little bit more. Is, you know, consumers, like, let's say we're before the world of e-commerce. Consumer goes to search for a mattress. You can't find the same mattress year over year, and you can never find the same mattress from retailer to retailer. Is the entire world online now becoming like the mattress industry?
You have to, right? I mean, you got to have uniqueness. What's the attraction of having the same product on 20 different sites? And so like, that's some of the negative attribution you could have potentially with just having another like functionality on Shopify kind of deal to go on Walmart.
Right.
But yeah, you've got to bring terminal uniqueness. You've got to not index. I mean, I think it's like the essentials. Like a lot of people are doing this across the board right now. Like you just don't want to be found everywhere, because then all you're going to do is create a pricing war between some really, really big companies, and your company is the one that suffers for it overall. You know.
Interesting. And I mean, with you, Ross, Shopify, it seems like they benefit from a multi-channel world. What Dan is saying here is that retailers need unique SKUs per channel. They don't want to broadcast the same SKU everywhere. So like, how do you actually manage that?
Yeah, well, I think if you're speaking from a brand perspective, I completely agree with Dan. You need to have a meaningful channel strategy in terms of the uniqueness of where your product shows up and how it's different, and the reason to believe there. But I think as it relates to Shopify, I don't know that it's going to, like, you know, incredibly move the needle, but I do think there's some unique brands, some unique companies that will integrate into Walmart, that will grow their assortment in a unique way. And it'll be beneficial for those companies to have access to that channel. You know, if you put yourself in Walmart shoes, you're way behind on selection. You don't have infrastructure to deliver Fulfilled by Walmart as broadly or at the scale that you wish you could. And you see where you reach the strategic conclusion to say, well, let me build that marketplace a little bit faster on the backs of a partnership with Shopify.
Yeah.
Over time, is that the play that's going to win? No, I don't think that's that's going to get it done. But when you look at speed and where they are competitively, I see where they drew that conclusion, and I think it'll be meaningful for some brands, not all of them, but some. Yeah. It'll be meaningful to have access to that channel.
Yeah, it's a good point about selection. I mean, when I was earlier in my career, when I was building out the Barnes & Noble marketplace, part of our pitch is very simple. Like, we're not Amazon. And I can tell you, call after call you go on, where brands want an alternative and they want to support, as long as it matches. You can prove that you match their customer demographic and sort of brand ethos, and you're an alternative, your marketplace seller sign-up team is going to kill it. Like, every brand wants to be on there. I think the big problem that Amazon is going to, or Walmart is going to have, and they've struggled with it, and even Mark Lurie, after he was acquired, one of his excuses for not shutting down Jet day one was that some people don't want to be associated with Walmart. They want to be on Jet. And so now that Jet is basically jettisoned, We're left in a place where, like, do I want my even contemporary fashion brand to be on Walmart?
Yeah, no, it's a fair push, something that Walmart has battled obviously for some time. And I think you're seeing brands answer that question increasingly yes. Not every brand will answer that question yes, but increasingly yes. Why? Some of those alternative channels that they had their volume going through are dying. They've got one that is very, very fast growing and growing in power, maybe in a concerning way that you guys mentioned, like they're rooting for an alternative. And I think Walmart has made some meaningful outreaches to a lot of those D2C brands that grew up through that to reassure them on, hey, let's launch your brand in a meaningful way that protects your brand equity. Let's make sure that you have some pricing integrity across the board. And so I think you're seeing brands jump in that didn't, just a few years ago. But no doubt there's going to be some areas of the store. You mentioned one like fashion, where there's some barriers to brand equity in terms of what channels you choose to put your brand in.
Right. No, that's super interesting. Yeah, I think we've kind of covered Walmart a little bit. Wanted to move on to emerging marketplaces, things outside of Amazon that brands and retailers should be thinking about. Let's maybe start with international marketplaces. Like, what's your experience been with international marketplaces? I don't know who wants to take this first. I'm happy to take your lead, but what are some of the things that those channels can offer that they may not be able to get from U.S. domestic marketplaces?
I mean, for me, that's a hard one. I mean, I focus on North America right now as a whole, but do consult with all of our international operations. I mean, I think the first thing a brand has to really establish is what type of relationship do they want to have in that specific country, right? Like, do you want to be B2B or do you want to be like a B2C brand? And then decide, am I going to go after Instacart? Am I going to go after Alibaba? Does it make sense? And kind of capitalize on it based on that opportunity. I've done a lot of work with Amazon in the EU. I mean, they were very relevant there, I would say, but there's still, outside the US, there's quite a few other major players that I don't have the most experience with. Ross might be able to weigh in a little bit better on that.
Yeah, similarly, I'm hamstrung a little bit here from an experience standpoint, but as I do have conversations with our brands, I think e-commerce can maybe deceptively lead brands to believe I can expand internationally really easy or really quickly.
Yeah.
And you can skip some of those larger strategic questions that Dan just mentioned and end up kind of launching on a marketplace and it not being terribly meaningful. Where I've seen brands do that successfully are partnering with agencies, or in some cases, some of our clients have gone through M&A where they've joined multinational organizations and there's expertise and infrastructure that instead of thinking, the market, really leaning on expertise there and just making sure you get back to the basics, understanding the consumer and the marketplace before just pushing inventory over to a warehouse, launching a PDP and saying like, okay, we're international.
Yeah, I think, Dan, your question is very relevant. I think the first thing I always ask people is like, what kind of business do you want to be in, B2B versus B2C? Do you want to sell your product at wholesale to a partner that just runs that region and you're just going to carve up the world that way? I want to partner in China and they're going to manage my store relationships, my relationship with Alibaba, JD, everything. They're just going to do it and they're going to cut me a check and I'm not going to worry about it. Or I'm going to make license royalties, like depending on how, what kind of firm you are. Or am I going to try and go direct? Like, do I want a relationship with those consumers? And having some experience, kind of my last job, I spent about 3 years with Borderfree and like eBay's global shipping program, helping manage the sort of product and the strategy for that channel. Cross-border has moved in the last 5 or 6 years for something you can do overseas, like relatively well, to something where even international consumers are expecting like very fast shipping turnarounds. And so if you're drop shipping from the US to, you know, Australia, that might be fine to get it to them in 2 weeks if it's not there at all, but it's probably fine for about 6 months until then the consumer's gonna, their expectations keep rising as well. And so local inventory is a huge part of that. You can't even participate in any of Alibaba's promotional days unless you have inventory in Tmall's warehouses.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a tricky one. I've been on both sides where, you know, we've successfully expanded internationally and worked out really well. And I've been on the other side where, you know, we grew top line, but it was at a major detriment to EBITDA, you know. Right. So, you know, you've got to figure out if you've maximized your opportunity here domestically, look at what your GMROI model is going to be for your inventory, figure out if it makes sense to really forward position items internationally, and then see, and you guys both touched on it, it's like, do you have the expertise to do it? You know, like, do you have someone that's an expert on Alibaba that understands their platform, that's going to capitalize on it, and you're willing to invest to do that? You know, we're pretty spoiled, like being based out of the US and doing well on like US platforms. Like you take that for granted, thinking that e-commerce is a universal language, and it's not. It's distinctly different in each country, you know. And not only that, and this is what we ran into in the past with another company, is the laws are succinctly different, right? So it is not super easy for a US company, for instance, to do business in the EU. You know, a lot of people don't realize how much tighter they are on regulations and stipulations when it comes to not so much product, I would say, ethicality, if you will, but more like, where are you sourcing the product from? Do you have everything in the different languages that it needs to accommodate the EU's law? Like, there's a lot of hair on the dog. You just have to be careful.
Yeah, definitely. And so I think, you know, people are unprepared for the fact, like, if we're just talking about marketplaces, not only is every marketplace in the US have different product specs, different attributes, different category structure, different pricing policies, different merchandising and advertising programs, but every single international marketplace, even provided by the same companies, also has different of all those things as well. You know, the Amazon even infrastructure for the UK is completely different than the US infrastructure.
Right. Separate teams, even within the EU, you know, there's separate teams. I'll give you another example of things that, you know, it's easy enough to think through when you're in that entrepreneurial mindset is, what's the impacts of what's the impact of who the shipper of record are for the taxation or duties of your product? I'll give you an example for Canada. If a partner buys a product from you in Canada, they pay duties most times on the actual wholesale cost. If you import it and then they buy it from you stateside, they're going to pay duties based on what the retail price is, which is a huge delta, and that's unique for every country. So it's always an interesting case study when you start looking at opportunities to expand.
Yeah, I mean, I was recently on a project where I was working with licensees that many of them don't even have license to the product in Canada.
Totally.
Or the ones that they do, they have, you know, some of them have JVs or different entities that do business in Canada, or even if they have their own company, the only way to get around these duties is to land the goods in Canada.
Right. Bring it to a port there and forward position it. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. So, talk to me about market. Like, maybe let's go back domestically for a little bit. Are there any marketplaces that are kind of on your radars that I either want to start investigating next year, or I think are up and coming, and maybe I'm starting to test? They're not like my mainstream channels yet, but I'm starting to see, test and see what the activity is there. And maybe Ross.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't going to probably answer your question how you anticipate, but I would say the retailers we work with often fall in that category for a lot of brands. Like, I'm going to decide or test if I'm going to sell on Walmart.com or Kroger.com or Target.com. So I think this shift to omni-channel retailers and their increasing relevancy with the penetration of COVID is probably speeding some of those strategic discussions in boardrooms for companies of, you know, it just wasn't big enough, you know, for me to really, you know, mess with in 2019. But now all of a sudden it's starting to be more meaningful. And so we are seeing more and more brands, reach out to us that are looking to sell to those retailers for the first time.
And are they, is it after they feel like they've optimized Amazon, or do people start reaching out to you before that point? Like when is a right time to start looking at some of these other channels?
Yeah, I've seen both, and typically it's not an either or. In some cases, it is an optimization. They've optimized Amazon, or they're at a power struggle. With that retailer looking for a yin to the yang. And in other cases, it's a better fit. You mentioned demographics or the consumer as brands come over. I would say the number one mistake they make, you mentioned it, Rick, is just assuming that it's the same.
Right.
And so, typically the software solutions that folks buy, from a PIM or a DAM are like, oh yeah, we just poured it on over. And it's like, well, there's a lot of unique fields and attributes and ways of doing work that it ends up being a little bit more complicated than folks think.
Got it. No, that's interesting. How about in the home category, Dan, from an emerging marketplace point of view?
I'll be candid. I mean, the home, when I look online, you have marketplaces that are blend between B2B and B2C as partnerships. So the main ones for us are going to be Wayfair, Amazon, and Overstock. eBay being an ancillary partner potentially down the road. And then you have people with an omni-channel presence. A lot of them direct source. So you look at like Williamson-Sonoma, Restoration Hardware, where it's really like a mono-channel structure. I don't think there's like specifically, we're always like, there's no one specifically we're really eyeing right now, I would say, that I'm like, oh, I want to be a part of what they're doing yet. Just because the barrier to entry right now in this like crazy war between Amazon, Wayfair, and now Walmart is quite steep when you look at acquisition. But we've toyed with Wish.com, seeing what they've got going on. We're always open to a new opportunity, and like I do think there's space for someone to execute the Alibaba model over here that they haven't yet on like urgency. Highly promotional. Wish is similar to that in nature, very visual, low on product content, but high on visual content. Like there's definitely an area for that. I'm looking for someone to do that in the home. It hasn't quite happened yet.
Where do you it'd be useful to benefit from your expertise while we have you here. Where do you put like Houzz and Pinterest in that mix? Or do you just put them in a different category?
I mean, Houzz it's an attractive platform. It makes sense for people to find our product, and we partner with Houzz. It makes sense to me in the ethos of finding product for the home during the discovery phase, like at the very top of the funnel. Like that's awesome. I think they're still kind of figuring it out and what that looks like long term. Because the hardest part is that you've got like a major war going between most of the e-com partners at the very bottom part of the funnel, and they're not really, they don't need a fight there. It's a different deal. So how much market penetration can you get? I think that remains to be determined. What was the second platform? Pinterest.
Pinterest, yeah.
Yeah, Pinterest is for us is a social media platform that's a great aggregator for traffic, but because of the nature of it, like I don't think it's going to be I don't see it as a platform for that's going to be transactional.
Yeah. Are there any things that you think Houzz could do to change your opinion of them?
I'm a big fan of Houzz. I mean, I think they're doing a lot of great things. They're not publicly traded, so it'd be really interesting to see kind of how the back end mechanics look. We get spoiled and getting to see that with a lot of the discovery with Amazon and Overstock and Wayfair. But the big thing for them is the gas to their engine is going to be new users, and how do you get new users and long-term adoption on there versus there's so many other platforms that are similar in nature, though they're not strictly for the home, but their competitors in the discovery phase are Google search, right? So like a Google image search, and now Facebook has some additional functionality that's a threat. Pinterest is their direct competitor that's not trying to transact on site really yet. So that's a difficult one. They've got some steep competition to kind of figure out their user acquisition model long term and what that looks like, but they've got great data. You know, I mean, they have the most coveted data that you can have for a transactional, and they're the only one that's really transactional at this point.
No, that's fascinating. Ross, kind of going over to you, like, someone comes to you like, I'm killing it on Amazon. I really have this huge opportunity with Walmart, Kroger, other things. They're like totally sold on what you're doing. Like, what are the things that they can bring over from Amazon that they maybe know about? And what are some of the things that they can't? Like maybe transferable versus non-transferable skills.
Yeah, so I think the most differentiated part of the Amazon ecosystem versus Walmart that is transferable is their marketing expertise. So that's just so much more well developed. So key search terms, you know, kind of those marketing strategy pieces are things that we hope will be more and more reapplicable as Walmart opens up inventory on the site. And so it's really still very much an organic search model. So we don't just reapply Amazon content. We have a proprietary way that we look at doing that on the Walmart platform, but it is helpful to not start from scratch, you know, so whenever they play it, can pass over their content that's helped them from a share search aspect. That's also helpful from an organic standpoint. The things that don't really reapply are the interplay between brick and mortar and online. And so most of our clients are omni-channel clients, so they're in both places. And so that is really, that story is being written right now as they just integrated the organization this week. There's a massive reorg that there's
I saw that.
One
affecting a lot of people.
team. So there's one merchandising team that's going to make decisions. And so that interplay between what makes it on the shelf and what it's doing online, it has been at play the last few years for sure, but the game just got faster. And so
I'm totally interested. So like here we are in 2020 and the word omnichannel, how long has it been around from the word multi-channel? And we're just now having one merchandising team. Like, tell me more about that.
Retailer.
Yeah. You know, I actually agree with the strategic choice. I think they made it for speed and focus. So their merchandising team that's been focused on brick and mortar, a lot of those folks have been doing that for 20, 30 years. And so rather than slow down to reteach or have them focus on the 2% or 3% of sales, they acquired talent through Jet, through other acquisitions that was able to really focus and speed their development on that side of commerce. But they see, obviously, as we see, it's total commerce, it's omni-channel. So it was bound to happen, and they decided now's the time.
Yeah, Dan, do you think the merchant reorg at Walmart is going to affect you guys at all?
Yeah, totally. I mean, we've definitely seen some shift. You know, we work closely with folks in Bentonville. We have a great presence there in store, but we also have a really great partnership online. I think for me, the underlying stuff from the last week is, we've heard about this for a while. They're coming together. Everybody's got to move to Bentonville. That's not super new news to anybody that's too close to it. The underlying stuff is like the layoffs as it relates to their property acquisition and store development team, right? So they, in essence, said, we've hit critical mass. We're not building more stores. They've been saying that to us for years. It's like, hey, the major growth opportunities are going to be online. And they really backed it up by like getting rid of that team. Like the transition to one team's like a no-brainer. You know, you're still going to see a hyper focus, I think, on their house brands with Better Home and Gardens and all the private label opportunities. You know, it'll be interesting to see how many native digital companies make that transition from online to in the store and have a presence there. Because I can tell you this, you get in store with Walmart, it is a powerful, powerful thing. There's a lot of money spent in those stores, you know? So I'm interested to see what that shift looks like. Cause I don't think it looks like what any of us can picture it right now. You know, it's like, can they really accommodate that volume in a true profitable way? I mean, you can cheat a lot online with the margin and forward positioning and 3PLs. I'm very interested to see what that looks like. it's going to be interesting to see how they focus now on a pure e-com /store strategy and how those teams all kind of mix together. You know, it's a blend. There's a lot of folks moving from New Jersey, from the Jet Building to Bentonville, and that's always an interesting mix, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
Thanks again for listening to another episode of E-commerce Deep Dive. Be sure to subscribe to your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube. And if you get a chance, go in and leave us a rating. It would help a lot. Thanks again, and talk to you soon.